Story number 1. The Rest Stop of Damnation. I remember that winter night better than any other. A moonless sky stretched over the desert highway, the hum of my truck's engine the only companion in the endless dark. I was somewhere in Nevada, along Highway 50, often called the loneliest road in America. My haul was behind schedule, my eyes burned from fatigue, and the dash gauge showed my fuel hovering near empty. A new wave of anxiety hit me. If I ran dry out here, I'd be stranded in a place with no help for dozens of miles. So when I saw a battered old sign reading gas, open 24 hours, its neon half burnt out, I felt a surge of relief. A single turn onto a narrow path led me to the station's flickering lights. The place was a squat building perched on a dusty patch, two pumps standing lonely under a buzzing fluorescent lamp. No brand name, no big corporate sign, just a cracked open sign in the window. Everything seemed still, as though the desert air weighed heavier here. I pulled my rig up to the pumps, the beams of my headlights carving out the darkness. Sand stretched in all directions, illuminated only by the dull station glow and my headlamps. Stepping out of the truck, the cold desert wind stung my cheeks. The silence was total, no passing cars, no distant roar of trucks. Just the wind scuttling across the gravel. As I approached the pump, I realized it was the old mechanical type with a spinning dial, not a modern digital setup. Couldn't see any place to swipe a card. I glanced around, puzzled that no one came out to greet me. A voice made me jump. "Need some gas?" It was a man standing just beside the station's door, a tall, gaunt figure in grimy overalls, face half lost in shadow under the flickering light. I stammered a reply, asking if he was open. He nodded, lips curving in a thin smile. "Always open," he said. Something about his voice prickled my nerves. "Inside to pay," he added, gesturing at the door. "We handle things in there." My gut whispered caution, but I had no choice. My gauge hovered near empty, and I was miles from anywhere. I forced a polite nod. "Sure, let me just fill up first," I said. He shrugged. "Pump's old. Flip the lever. I'll be inside." Without waiting, he turned, slipping into the station's doorway. I lifted the nozzle, engaged the ancient pump lever, and heard the slow churn of fuel. The desert hush pressed around me, the overhead lamp sputtering. My imagination conjured shapes in the swirling dust. I told myself to calm down, you're just edgy from exhaustion. Finally, the dial on the pump gave a last click. I returned the nozzle, took a breath, and headed for the station's entrance. The door creaked open onto a cramped store lit by a single dim bulb. A few dusty shelves stood along the walls, stocked with odd items, cans with faded labels, jars of murky liquid. The air smelled stale, tinged with something like old incense. At a worn counter stood the man from earlier, arms resting on the surface, that thin smile still on his face. Another figure lurked by the corner, short, wiry, wearing a grimy cap pulled low. He grinned at me with a glint in his eye. An uneasy chill crept through me. "How much do I owe you?" I managed, pulling out my wallet. The tall man shook his head slowly. "We don't take normal payment," he said. My mouth went dry. I have cash," I insisted. He chuckled, hollow and humorless. "We deal in something else." The short man locked the door behind me with a decisive click. My pulse jumped. I glanced around for a second exit, only saw a dusty storage area behind the counter. The tall man plucked a deck of cards from his overalls pocket and laid it on the counter. "We play a little game. If you win, you can drive away. If you lose, you stay." My heart pounded so loud I thought they might hear it. I stammered, "Look, I don't know what you're up to, just let me pay for the fuel, I'll be gone." The short man snickered, stepping closer, crossing arms in a stance that blocked me from leaving. "The desert hungers," he muttered. "We're just its keepers." My stomach lurched. Could this be a twisted robbery? But the dread in the air felt deeper, almost supernatural. They forced me to sit at a small rickety table near the corner. The overhead bulb flickered, casting jumping shadows on the walls. The tall man shuffled the deck with surprising grace. The short man produced a small black pouch, setting it on the table. The tall man explained in a raspy monotone, "Best 2 out of 3. Cards, then dice if needed. The desert decides. My hand shook. I couldn't believe this was real, but the short man's grin and the tall man's dead stare convinced me it was. The tall man drew a card first, an ancient-looking deck, edges yellowed. He flipped a king of spades, nodding with satisfaction. "Your turn," he growled. I forced my trembling hand to pick a card, flipping it face up, the 4 of hearts. The short man chuckled softly. "Round 1, I lost." Next round, the tall man drew again. Ace of clubs. Fear clenched my gut. I drew a joker that shimmered, morphing into a twisted tower like some unholy tarot symbol. The men hissed, uncertain. After a moment of silent tension, the short man croaked, "One for him." The tall man cursed. A tie, 1-1. The final draw. The tall man flipped, the 9 of diamonds. An unimpressive card, he frowned. My turn, I drew with a silent prayer. The card was blank, then black ink bled across it in the shape of a monstrous desert shape devouring a figure. The short man hooted, "We're at a tie again." The tall man's face blazed with anger. "We finished this with the dice," he snarled, opening the black pouch. He dumped out runic dice, each etched with bizarre symbols. He forced them into my hand. "Roll," he commanded. With no other option, I threw them onto the table. They clattered, each landing on cryptic glyphs. The tall man steadied them, lip curled. The short man grunted, "He wins." A look of fury crossed the tall man's face. He exhaled, defeated. "He's free," the short man said in a voice laced with resentment. At once, the overhead bulb popped, darkness swallowing the store. The air choked with a sulfuric stench. I heard them scuffle, perhaps in frustration. I scrambled from the table, nearly knocking over a rack of dusty cans. My hand found the door handle. I yanked, and it opened easily, letting a swirl of cold desert air rush in. I staggered out onto the station's lot, hard hammering. My rig was still there, engine idling, as if they'd started it for me. I didn't question it. I bolted into the cab, slammed the door. In my side mirror, I caught a glimpse of the station's interior light blinking back on, revealing the 2 men watching me from behind the glass, expressions of cold fury. Then the neon sign above them flickered once, sputtered out. Darkness cloaked the entire station. I gunned the engine, tires spinning on loose sand. Within moments, I careened back onto Highway 50, the rig's headlights piercing the emptiness. I expected pursuit, but the rearview remained black. I forced my foot down on the pedal until the gloom parted, replaced by the distant glow of a small town's lights. There, I tried babbling my story to the local clerk at a real gas station. He thought I was delirious or on something. He claimed no station existed in that stretch. Eventually, he kicked me out, calling me crazy. Yet my fuel tank was full, and I'd paid no money. I returned days later in daylight, searching for the place, finding nothing but an abandoned foundation half buried in dunes, a sign snapped in half. Old rumors from the locals spoke of a station that burned down decades ago, rumored to be run by devil worshippers who lured travelers to bet their souls. That was months ago. I still jolt awake at night, hearing the shuffle of that deck, the rattle of runic dice. The desert wind in my nightmares sounds like those men chanting about the desert hungers. I've avoided traveling alone at night, because I know if I pass that spot again, the station might reappear, waiting with its cursed deck of cards and a twisted grin behind the counter. Next time, I may not be so lucky. So if you ever drive lonely stretches of Highway 50 in Nevada on a dark winter's night, and your fuel gauge drifts too low, be warned. If you spot a flickering neon sign promising 24-hour gas in a deserted patch of sand, think twice. You might find yourself in a place not of this world, where men in grimy overalls deal in souls, not dollars, and a single gamble determines if you leave or remain in that dusty rest stop of damnation forever. Story number 2. The passenger who never left. I've always considered myself a rational man. A Texas highway in the dead of night, a pounding rain drenching the asphalt, that never spooked me. I'd been driving 18-wheelers for over 15 years, hauling freight across thousands of miles, through storms and deserts, nights so black I'd see nothing but the faint reflectors on the guardrails. I prided myself on calm, on not letting my imagination run wild when thunderheads rolled in. But that was before the night I let a stranger into my truck's cab, a night that ended my illusions about the living being the only ones who hitch rides on lonely highways. My name is Travis Rhodes. I'm from a small town near Lubbock. Grew up working on my uncle's farm, then switched to trucking for better pay and the lure of open roads. I never believed in ghosts, though I heard enough tall tales from other drivers about phantom hitchhikers and roadside apparitions. I'd laugh it off, certain it was nothing but road-weary minds playing tricks. Now, I'm not so sure. Ever since that night, I see the lines between this world and the next in a different, much darker way. It happened late last winter. My route took me from Amarillo down south toward Houston, crossing a big swath of rural highways. The weather was bad, thunderstorms marching across the plains, rain so heavy I could barely see. The downpour turned the blacktop into a slick mirror, the wipers unable to keep up. At around midnight, I rolled onto a smaller highway, which cut through endless farmland dotted with the occasional windmill. My left elbow was sore from gripping the wheel so tight. The radio spat static, no phone signal. Lightning forked across the sky, thunder rumbling seconds later. The wind occasionally buffeted my rig, making it sway. The monotony of water drumming on the roof lulled me into that half-hypnotic state drivers know too well. Then, in the glow of my headlights, I saw a figure trudging along the shoulder, a man, bent forward under a poncho or something, soaked to the bone. Usually, I avoid picking up hitchhikers. It's against company policy, plus you never know what trouble might come. But the storm was brutal. Something in me pitied the poor soul. And maybe a flicker of my mother's old teachings, help those in need, guided my foot to the brake. I slowed, hazard lights flashing, pulling onto the shoulder a few yards ahead of him. I half expected him to approach, but he stood still, as if uncertain. I rolled down the window, shouted over the storm, "Need a ride?" "Weather's nasty." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, hurrying forward. He opened the passenger door with a creak, climbed in, dripping water on the floor mat. Up close, in the overhead light, he looked young, maybe late 20s or early 30s, brown hair plastered to his skull, face drawn, eyes hollow. He wore old jeans, boots caked in mud, a worn jacket. I asked, "Where you headed?" He said in a low voice, "South." That was it. We merged back onto the highway, wipers squeaking. The hitchhiker stared at the windshield, occasionally glancing at me. I tried small talk, introducing myself. He just said his name was Jack, said little else. His voice had an odd echo, as if he was speaking from far away. I offered a spare towel from the back, but he barely used it, just clutching it in his lap. The cab's overhead lamp revealed his skin looked pale, almost bluish. I chalked it up to the cold. A chill crawled along my spine anyway. The highway was deserted, the storm intensifying. Lightning flashed frequently, showing glimpses of farmland turned to swampy fields. I asked Jack how long he'd been out there. He didn't answer directly, just mumbled, "A long time." Another bolt lit the cab, revealing his hollow cheeks, water dripping from his hair. My uneasy feeling grew. Time passed in tense silence. Eventually, I asked, "So, you got family somewhere? Or a place I can drop you?" He stared at me with those sunken eyes. "I used to, once," he muttered, voice trembling. "But not anymore." My scalp prickled. I pressed, "You okay, friend? Need medical help?" He shook his head vigorously. Then he turned to stare out the passenger window, ignoring further questions. We continued. The storm hammered us, hydroplaning a few times, my knuckles white on the wheel. The only sound beyond the rain was Jack's ragged breathing. After maybe 40 miles, a sign indicated a small rest area up ahead, rare in that part of Texas. I considered pulling in, letting the hitchhiker off if he wanted. But when we approached, the rest area was dark, gates closed, presumably under renovation. The next town was another hour at least. That dread coiled in my gut. Lightning flashed again, and for an instant, I glimpsed Jack's reflection in the windshield. He wasn't there. Or his reflection was a smear, not matching his physical form. My heart lurched. I blinked, telling myself it was a trick of the light. Near 2 a.m., the tension in the cab thickened. Jack abruptly spoke, "You shouldn't have stopped for me." It jolted me out of my tunnel vision. "What do you mean?" I asked. He said nothing else. He just stared forward, lips compressed. Another bolt of lightning revealed his eyes had gone milky, as though no pupils. Fear flickered through me. I tried to keep calm. The road curved near a battered sign reading "Road subject to flooding." Water pooled along the shoulder. A flash of movement on the radio panel caught my eye, like a reflection of a face behind me. My heart slammed. I glanced in the mirror, saw only the empty sleeper area. The reflection was gone. Another trick? I questioned my sanity. The storm's unrelenting barrage weighed on me. Then a quiet rapping sound began on the sleeper's back wall, a soft knock-knock that sent chills along my spine. Could something be inside the truck? "You hear that?" I whispered. Jack nodded slowly, as if unsurprised. The knocking persisted, slow, deliberate, as if a code. I forced a laugh. We must have something loose back there. No reply from Jack, who just closed his eyes. After a few miles, the radio hissed with static. A faint voice crackled, "Break, break, anyone there?" Relief flared. I grabbed the mic, barked, "This is Travis, I read you." Over. The voice responded, "Storm's bad, watch for flooding, lost a rig near mile marker 220. Then static swallowed the rest. The rig that was lost? Possibly an accident. My chest tightened with dread. Suddenly, Jack turned to me, eyes wide, lips parted. "You can't outrun it," he said in a haunted tone. "They'll take you too." "Who?" I demanded. He just shook his head, tears brimming. My hair stood on end. This was no normal hitchhiker. Moments later, the engine coughed, as if starved of fuel. The dash lights flickered. "Oh God, not now," I muttered. The gauges showed half a tank. The engine stuttered again, but kept going. The radio burst into static, a faint moaning weaving through it. Then I heard a voice, barely audible, calling my name. Lightning flared, thunder rattling the cab. A wave of panic gripped me. I forced the truck onward, scanning for any sign of a rest stop or exit. Nothing but the swirling black night and watery roads. The next blow came from Jack. Without warning, he jerked toward me, seizing the wheel. We swerved, nearly flipping. I fought him off, shouting, "What the hell are you doing?" He glared, face contorted, mouth trembling. "I shouldn't have been on the road that night," he muttered. "I died in the flood. Drowned, now they want more." My mind whirled. "You died?" The truck steadied, continuing forward as if in a nightmare autopilot. Jack's eyes brimmed with despair. "I never escaped that storm. I've been wandering, waiting for someone to pick me up, share my fate." My blood turned to ice. A ghost, a damned spirit in my passenger seat. The hammering on the sleeper's wall resumed, louder now, insistent. The radio hissed, voices overlapping, moans echoing. I could barely focus on the slick highway. The water on the road deepened, each puddle threatening hydroplane. The headlights revealed a sign, "Bridge out ahead." My heart seized. The navigation had shown no such closure. Jack's face twisted. "You can't stop. They're behind us. If we stop, they'll take you." "Who are they?" I yelled. He just moaned, "Those who drowned, restless in the floodwaters. They roam each storm, luring more souls." My chest tightened. Another clang from the back. The overhead dome light flickered. I realized some entity was in the sleeper area, or something ephemeral. Up ahead, the road curved, the water deeper. My wipers struggled. Another sign repeated, "Bridge out, turn around." But there was nowhere to turn. Ditches on both sides. If we reversed on the narrow highway in this storm, we'd risk sliding into the flooded fields. Meanwhile, those knocks from the back grew more frenzied, as if an entire group hammered. The radio squealed, forming words, "Join, the drowned, come to the waters." My breath came in short gasps. Jack groaned, clutching his seat. "They're here," he said. The headlights caught shapes shambling onto the road behind us, half submerged in the watery asphalt, arms outstretched. Their faces glowed pale, water dripping from their hair. The reflection of their eyes burned with unholy light. They advanced slowly, a legion of drowned souls. My mind reeled. "We have to get out of here." I slammed the accelerator, the truck forging ahead. Lightning revealed the upcoming bridge, indeed broken halfway, the entire structure collapsed into the raging current below. My heart sank. We faced certain doom if we continued. "We can't cross that," I shouted, glancing at Jack. His voice trembled, then we faced him. He gestured to the rear. I saw more drowned figures emerging from the side ditches, blocking retreat. We were trapped. In a frenzy, I scanned the roadside. A small farm track branched off to the left, leading up a slight embankment. It might be stable enough. With no other option, I yanked the wheel, the truck fishtailing, tires spraying water. The shapes lurched forward, arms reaching. The engine roared as we jolted onto that track, mud and gravel clanging under the chassis. The drowned legion hissed, an inhuman wail that rang in my ears. The short side road led us up a rise, away from the main highway's flood. The illusions in the mirrors showed silhouettes swarming behind, shrieking. The knocks in the sleeper area crescendoed. A horrifying notion, they might tear their way in. But the truck managed the slope. Soon we emerged onto a dirt lot near an old barn. The barn's interior glowed faintly with some lantern or battery lamp. Another figure? My mind reeled. The truck sputtered, nearly out of torque. I parked, engine idling. Jack cowered, a haunted expression. "If they catch us, we vanish forever," he whispered. The barn door slid open, revealing an old farmer with a flashlight, blinking in confusion. I tumbled out, yelling for help. The old man stared at me, then at Jack stepping from the passenger side. Except, in the old man's eyes, Jack was invisible. The farmer's gaze passed right through him. My blood froze. Jack stiffened, noticing he wasn't seen. "I can't go in," he whispered, face lined with sorrow. "They're calling me back." Outside, the moan of drowned spirits echoed closer. He looked at me, voice trembling. "You must drive on, save yourself. Once dawn breaks, they recede." The old farmer demanded answers, not understanding half of what was happening. I tried to explain, but my words sounded insane. Jack clasped my shoulder. An electric chill coursed through me. "Thank you for picking me up," he said quietly. "I only wanted a chance to break free, but I can't. Not yet." A tear slipped down his cheek. "Go. Survive." Then, in a swirl of storm-lashed rain, he stepped away, dissolving into the darkness. The drowned wail sounded, and for an instant, I saw phantom shapes converge on him. Then the night parted in a thunderclap, and the illusions vanished. Only the desert hush remained, the wind howling across watery fields. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing with relief and horror. The old farmer helped me inside his barn, gave me a blanket, hot coffee. By morning, the storm eased, the highways reopened. Officials found the collapsed bridge, but no mention of any ghostly legion. I recounted what happened, and they gave me confused stares. My dash cam was inexplicably wiped of that time period, no footage. The farmer confirmed I arrived half-crazed, but saw no hitchhiker. The local police shrugged, chalking it up to near hypothermia or stress. Yet I know better. I can't forget that blank stare in Jack's eyes, the pounding in my sleeper, the legion of drowned souls haunting the watery roads. Every so often, storms reawaken these lost spirits, and they lure new victims to share their fate. If I'd not turned onto that farm track, the flooded highway or the drowned ghosts might have claimed me. As for Jack, he remains out there, wandering highways in the rain, hoping someone will pick him up so he can attempt one more escape from the watery doom binding his soul. So if you ever drive Texas highways at night, especially in a torrential downpour, and see a bedraggled figure by the shoulder, face hidden by the sheets of rain, be cautious. Sometimes the lost soul in your passenger seat wants more than a ride. They might drag you into the sorrowful realms they inhabit, never to return. Because some storms don't just soak the roads, they soak up the living, adding them to the endless drowned parade. And once you hear knocking in your sleeper or see watery footprints in the passenger footwell, it might be too late to turn back. Story number 3. The Endless Crossing. I've been behind the wheel of my Kenworth for a decade, roaming highways from coast to coast, but never once did I feel truly lost until the night I got caught on that godforsaken bridge in Louisiana. I was hauling construction materials from Baton Rouge to a small town near the Texas border, chasing a tight delivery window. The night sky was moonless, the bayous and cypress trees shrouded in thick, humid dark. I had the route on my GPS, but when I reached a certain back road, it insisted I keep moving straight. No mention of a bridge. Yet there it was, an old, narrow structure of steel and rotting wood, half forgotten in the swamplands. If I'd known it was the last route I'd ever want to take, I would have spun the rig around right then and there. But we never see the final trap coming, do we? I guess I should set the stage. It was near midnight, a slight drizzle pattering the windshield, each droplet hissing against the truck's headlights. The region smelled of wet moss and stagnant water, a tang that settled in the back of your throat. Spanish moss dangled from overhead branches, half concealing the battered road sign, Bayou Purdue Bridge. My phone had 0 bars, so I'd been relying on the truck's onboard GPS, which kept saying, "Continue for 2 miles, then turn left." But the map on the screen showed only a straight line across water. Then, out of the gloom, the bridge manifested, a single-lane span crossing a wide, sluggish bayou. A sign reading weight limit 10 tons hung askew. My rig was heavier, but I traversed rickety surfaces before, so I inched forward carefully, suspecting a shorter route. A part of me insisted it was a bad idea. Still, I continued. The moment my front tires touched the wooden planks, I felt a tremor in my gut. The boards groaned under the weight, but not alarmingly so. My headlights revealed rusted metal trusses overhead, swathed in vines. In that flickering illumination, the water below glimmered dully, so black it seemed bottomless. The drizzle intensified, wind rustling the wetlands. A faint shape flitted among the cypress knees. Probably a gator or an owl, I told myself. I was half right. The real beasts lurking out there, though, were far worse. As I guided the truck onward, the boards rattled, and a heavy sense of dread pressed on me. The crossing was longer than it looked. My mirror glimpsed a swirl of fog creeping in from behind, enveloping the way I'd come. The tires thumped a final plank. The front wheels reached solid ground on the other side, though solid was relative, just a muddy track with another battered sign pointing onward. I exhaled relief, pressed the gas, and the truck rolled along a narrow road cutting through more swamp. My GPS beeped, instructing me to turn left in 0.2 miles. The screen glitchily displayed a blinking arrow. I followed it down a side path, thick with overgrowth. Each jolt of the suspension jarred my teeth. 10 minutes of creeping, and the GPS declared, recalculating, proceed straight. Fine, I thought. The machine was confused by the poor coverage. I advanced. Another sign, Bayou Purdue Bridge. My brow furrowed. Didn't I just cross that? Another bridge, maybe? But as I turned a bend, my headlights revealed the exact same structure, the same rust-eaten trusses, the same graffiti on the battered sign. My stomach dropped. Impossible, I muttered. I've been traveling in a loop? I brushed it off as bad directions. Fine, I'd cross again, then find a better route. The alternative was reversing the entire rig down that narrow path. So I traversed the bridge a second time, ignoring the fresh wave of unease as the boards groaned again. This time, a swirl of fog hovered in the center, forcing me to slow. The truck's high beams cut through it, revealing fleeting shapes, branches maybe, or lumps of driftwood bobbing in the water. Or so I told myself. The bridge ended. I found myself again on that muddy road. The GPS beeped, turn left in 0.2 miles. Exasperation grew. I refused, trying a right instead. But that path ended abruptly at a locked gate. No choice but to backtrack. And so, inevitably, I approached the dreaded sign for Bayou Purdue Bridge again. By the third crossing, cold sweat clung to my neck. The console clock read 1:25 a.m. Each time, the route insisted I re-enter the same loop. My mind reeled. Could I be in some bizarre glitch, driving in circles? The surroundings changed slightly, more thick fog, a heavier hush from the swamp. The drizzle grew to a cold, steady rain. The wooden planks sounded different too, squeaking in a discordant pitch. Halfway across, the hair on my arms pricked up. I could have sworn I heard a distant cry, like someone moaning for help. It drifted from beneath the bridge, or maybe from the black water. My spine tingled. I pressed the accelerator, eager to get off. But the next road led me right back. The signage was identical, each detail repeated. Fear took root. Something supernatural was at play. I radioed for help, only static. My phone was dead. The dash lights flickered as though the battery was failing. Desperation mounted. I tried crossing a fourth time, searching the gloom for any other route. None existed. The cypress groves parted only for this cursed road. The clock read 2 a.m. The loop repeated, my mind unraveling. On the fifth crossing, the environment turned drastically ominous. The drizzle became a pounding rain, thunder boomed overhead. The planks beneath my wheels seemed more warped, each passing second echoing with clunking that sounded like a heartbeat. Halfway across, the headlights dimmed. Then, from the side mirrors, I glimpsed movement behind me, a figure perched at the rear of my trailer, clinging to the rig. My breath caught. Could it be a desperate hitchhiker? Fear pounded. I accelerated, but the shape remained, hunched, face hidden. Then lightning flashed, revealing a face with hollow eye sockets, water pouring off shriveled cheeks. Another flash, it vanished. I nearly lost control of the steering, but forced myself to keep going, ignoring the icy panic. Once across, I whipped out of the cabin, searching with a flashlight. The trailer's rear was empty, no footprints in the mud. My heart hammered. I returned to the cab, locked the doors. Another loop awaited. My mind swirled with curses. I tried reversing, but the road behind seemed to shift, heavy vegetation blocking the path. The only way forward was across that cursed bridge. The clock, 2:30 a.m. The storm hammered louder, wind rattling branches. Fog swirled thicker, clinging to the rig like a living thing. On the sixth crossing, the center of the bridge was coated in algae-like slime, or maybe rotting leaves. The board's groan was louder, like tortured screams. Then came a knock, clear as day, on the passenger door. I almost lost it, yanking the wheel dangerously. Another knock, rapping in a slow pattern. My instincts screamed not to open. But the knock repeated, each strike a spike of dread. Summoning nerve, I cracked the window an inch, peering out. In the lightning's flash, a face peered back, gray, waterlogged hair plastered around hollow eyes, lips parted in silent agony. A drowned man, or something once human. The water dripping from his clothes smelled of brackish decay. My voice froze. The figure rasped, "Come, join us." Then it slid away, vanishing over the railing. I gunned the engine, crossing the rest of the bridge in a mad dash. But again, the road on the other side led me back. The clock read 3 a.m. I was sobbing now, panic and exhaustion shredding my nerves. I tried every variation, straight, left, right, reversing, but the loop always ended at that bridge. Each crossing more nightmarish. The seventh time, corpses or illusions of corpses clung to the railings, moaning softly. The eighth time, the entire surface seemed submerged in shallow water, my rig barely forging through. The ninth time, the plank boards turned black and spongy, the stench of rot overwhelming. Each pass, the loop's terror intensified, as if the place fed on my fear. At 3:30 a.m., on the 10th crossing, a heavy presence manifested. Shapes rose from the water below, spirits or undead, I can't say. They clambered onto the side walkway, arms outstretched, faces etched with centuries of anguish. My rig's engine sputtered, wanting to stall. The headlights flickered, revealing these silent watchers with open mouths. They advanced, each step watery and slow. A voice echoed in my mind, "You cannot leave. Join us in the depth. We wait for you." My lungs constricted. I roared at the truck to push forward, somehow the engine caught, the wheels biting the slick boards. I barreled through the phantoms, half expecting them to tear me from the cab. They parted or vanished, howling in my mind but not physically stopping me. The road afterward spat me out in a swirl of rain. The clock read 3:45 a.m. Another curve, another reapproach. My tears mingled with sweat. The horror was unstoppable, the endless crossing. I recalled old lore about vengeful spirits from a sunken settlement or a tragic crossing. Perhaps this was an echo of some mass drowning, a curse laid on the living. I prayed for sunrise, but night endured. Finally, near 4 a.m., I pulled the rig to a halt before the bridge for the 11th time, refusing to cross. The watery illusions parted to reveal a faint glow behind me. Could it be dawn? My instinct said if I waited, maybe the sun would break the loop. Then the gloom thickened, swirling around the rig. The truck shook, as if hammered by invisible fists. The wind screeched. Fog seeped under the door. In my side mirror, a silhouette loomed, impossibly tall. It advanced, pressed a monstrous, water-ruined face to the glass. My mind screamed. The figure lifted a dripping hand, splaying bony fingers. Another rap on the door. A voice in my head, drive or be taken. Something about the words hammered my psyche, promising a fate worse than death if I defied them. I complied, broken by terror, pushing the rig onto the bridge once more. This time, mid-bridge, the board splintered with a thunderous crack. My front wheels sank an inch. Water sprayed up. I was sure we'd plummet. But at the last second, the boards held. The illusions parted, revealing the far side. I pressed on, engine roaring. The rig lurched off the bridge onto the muddy road. The loop began again, except something changed. The swirling illusion shrieked, the entire scene trembled like a glitching nightmare. Then the entire night cracked open with a flash of lightning, revealing the real dawn sky beyond. The illusions tore apart, water receding. I found myself on a normal road, crossing an old but passable bridge in early morning light. The storm was gone, replaced by a gray dawn drizzle. In my mirror, the battered structure behind me looked small, ordinary. No sign of the horrors. My watch read 6 a.m., though it felt like days had passed. The truck's console beeped with half-lost signals. I kept driving until I reached a main highway, numb with relief. In the aftermath, no local maps listed Bayou Perdue Bridge. Some folks claim it washed out decades ago. Others say it was never built. Yet I know I endured that endless crossing, repeated loops across a haunted threshold, assaulted by drowned apparitions hungry for new victims. I left that route behind, never returning to that part of Louisiana, too haunted by nightmares. But to any traveler out there, if you ever find yourself forced down an unknown path in the wetlands and come upon a decaying old bridge in the middle of a storm, read the signs carefully. If it reads Bayou Perdue or something half-legible, turn around, no matter how lost you feel. Because once you start crossing that cursed structure, the drowned spirits might decide you won't leave, replaying the crossing again and again, until your soul joins theirs in the water's murky depths. And the more you fight, the tighter they cling, refusing to let you escape their watery grasp. Let my story be your warning. Some roads lead only to an endless crossing you may never return from. Story number 4. The Signal from the Ghost Road. I've been hauling freight across Arizona highways for a decade, and I've always found comfort in the wide open spaces, the desert wind blowing across the baked earth, the sky so vast it could swallow you whole. There's something quietly thrilling about those empty roads at night, headlights tunneling through the darkness. I used to love the hush of the desert. Then came the night I picked up a strange radio signal on a lonely stretch near the Sonoran border, a signal that changed everything I thought I knew about life and death. It started as a routine run. I left Phoenix in the late afternoon, heading south on a back route rarely used, hoping to shave time off my usual route. The client needed an overnight delivery in Yuma by sunrise. The forecast called for mild weather, no storms, just a typical desert chill once the sun dipped. Perfect for nighttime driving. My rig was loaded with packaged goods, the trailer only half full, so the truck handled smoothly. For the first few hours, the drive was uneventful. The only company I had was a crackly old radio station playing classic rock, the swirl of dust in my headlights, and a few tumbleweeds scuttling across the road. By around 9 p.m., the road grew utterly deserted. No gas stations, no passing vehicles, just cacti silhouettes looming in starlight. The temperature plummeted. I fiddled with the radio dial, bored with static-laced music. Suddenly, at around the 96.7 frequency, somewhere in that zone, I heard a faint voice. It was female, trembling, calling for help. Hello? Please, can anyone hear me? I froze, perplexed. Another low burst of static, then her voice again, a note of desperation. I'm stuck. It's so dark. Please. Shivers prickled my neck. I tried to lock the station, but the reception was weak. The voice faded in and out, garbled by static. I managed to catch fragments. Car, crash, can't get out, stuck on the road. Do you hear me? My heart pounded. The idea of someone trapped out here in the desert at night was terrifying. I grabbed my CB to see if any local responders might be on, but got no answer. The woman's voice cut through again, faint but urgent. GPS leading me wrong, dead end, no help, please. Then a whimper. I had no direct phone signal, typical of the remote desert. But I couldn't ignore her pleas. If she was truly out there, in a wreck somewhere, time was critical. The radio hissed, then a short beep repeated. I recognized it as a ping or location signal. A voice followed, follow me, the station crackled, the voice skipping like a broken record. My GPS beeped in that moment, jarring me. I glanced at the screen. The route that had been locked in for Yuma suddenly recalculated. The line shifted, pointing me toward a side road, an unmarked path I'd just passed. The screen read, turn around in 0.2 miles. My gut twisted. Could that be a coincidence? The woman's voice had said her GPS led her astray. Now mine was recalculating to an unknown side route. The synergy was too weird. But the pleas kept echoing in my head. If she was real, she needed me. If it was some hoax or glitch, I'd find out soon enough. Against my better judgment, I braked, executed a slow turnaround, and headed back. Sure enough, the side road was barely visible, a dirt track branching off the main highway, no sign or marker. My GPS insisted proceed on local route. The radio hissed again, please, hurry, can't breathe, my stomach nodded. I turned onto the track, the rig's headlights revealing a rough dirt path with no stripes, just dusty tire ruts. The desert spread wide on either side, moonless. My spotlight beams caught occasional saguaros, twisted shapes in the gloom. The minutes crawled. The radio station's static grew louder. The woman's voice flickered in and out, half-lost phrases. Time, running out, can't see, she cried softly. I pressed onward, adrenaline fueling me. The GPS indicated a left turn ahead, though physically I saw nothing but more desert. Then, at the last second, I saw a break in the scrub that might be a path. I turned, the rig's suspension protesting as we bumped along a narrower, rock-strewn route. A sign flickered in my headlights, private road, keep out. The letters were chipped. My mind screamed caution, but that voice, help me, repeated. I pressed on, the radio's reception somehow steadier now. A chill breeze rattled the truck's windows, though the temperature on the dash read not too cold. Possibly the desert night playing tricks. Another half-mile in, the path curved around a small rise. Suddenly, the route opened onto an old paved road, barely a single lane wide, cracked and overgrown with weeds. The GPS beeped, proceed for 7 miles. I cursed softly, this was getting insane. But the woman's voice returned with clarity, tears in her tone, I see lights, are you there? Please, I pressed the pedal, feeling I was close. The road was full of potholes, my trailer bouncing. Through the windshield, I glimpsed occasional patches of metal guardrail half buried in sand. Then, a rotting wooden sign, Morado Road. Not on any map I'd seen. The radio station gave a final beep, the woman's voice faintly said, help, hurry, before dissolving into static. My chest pounded. I was nearly out of range? Or nearing the source? The old road twisted around a low hill. My headlights revealed a bizarre sight, a half-collapsed blacktop that ended abruptly near a ditch. If anyone crashed here, they'd be easy to find. But there was no wreck, no car. Just tumbleweeds. I braked. The dash clock read nearly 2 a.m. The hush of the desert pressed in. The radio died to pure static, no voice. I hopped down from the cab, flashlight in hand, scanning for skid marks or any sign of a crash. Nothing. The area was eerily still. My footsteps crunched the gravel. The wind carried a faint moan. Possibly the wind, or so I told myself. After a few minutes, I found no trace of a wreck, no footprints. Furious confusion churned in me. Was I chasing a ghost signal? Disheartened, I returned to the truck, intending to turn around and bail. But the rig wouldn't start. The engine clicked, refusing to turn over, battery gauge normal. My frustration flared. That's when I noticed something on the side mirror, a smudge, as if a wet hand had touched it from outside. But I was alone. A wave of unease crawled along my spine. I tried the ignition again, same dead click. The radio in the cab flickered to life, static, then a faint breathing sound. Then the woman's voice, "You," came, but too late, the last word elongated into a despairing wail. The overhead dome light flickered. My fear soared. I hammered the steering wheel. Lightning flashed overhead, though no storm had been predicted. Thunder rumbled. The radio hissed again, but now a man's voice rasped, "She's ours now. You as well." The hair on my arms rose. My reflection in the windshield looked paler than normal, eyes wide. The seat under me felt cold. I forced the door open, stepping back onto the deserted road, scanning the darkness for some presence. The wind whipped dust across the asphalt. Then a faint glow drifted across the horizon, like ghost lights dancing among the cactus stands. Each glimmer bobbed, forming a path deeper into the desert. The woman's voice returned, no longer on the radio but in my head, "Follow, or remain lost." A wave of dizziness hit me. The environment felt unreal, as if the desert was a stage. Against all logic, I trudged after the lights, leaving my rig behind, hoping to find a generator or something. The lights receded into the gloom, luring me. My heart hammered, but curiosity and the desperate need to fix this overcame fear. The road disintegrated into a sandy wash. The lights vanished behind a rocky outcropping. I scrambled up, breath ragged. Then, cresting the ridge, I saw a phantom scene, an old collision site, a car wreck half sunken in the sand, rusted skeleton, windows smashed. The night air turned frigid. Approaching the wreck, my flashlight revealed a half-rotted interior, seats torn. I glimpsed a bleached bone among the debris. My stomach lurched. Then a swirl of dust formed, coalescing into the shape of a woman, hair matted, face contorted in sorrow, eyes hollow. She wore a stained t-shirt, the outline of a seatbelt across her chest. She raised a trembling hand as if to shield me away. Her mouth opened, no sound emerged, then the radio in my pocket beeped, broadcasting a scream. The woman's ghostly form flickered, tears streaming. "I never left," she whispered, voice echoing from the static in my jacket radio. I staggered back, terror overwhelming. She drifted closer, ghostly features illuminated by an unseen glow. "You mustn't be here," she said, lips trembling. "They keep me, they want others." My mind reeled. Who wants others? The wind howled, sending a cloud of sand swirling. The ghost pointed toward the horizon, where those mysterious lights flickered again. "They lure the living to this dead road. For them." She dissolved with a final sob. A monstrous presence pressed in on me, like an invisible weight. The wind roared. The dunes around me seemed to shift. Then I saw them, silhouettes stepping out of the gloom, their forms tattered, faces half-eaten by sand. They advanced in jerky movements, arms outstretched. My radio hissed with multiple voices, "Stay, with us, feed the desert," my brain screamed to run. I bolted back down the ridge, lungs burning, hearing the wails behind me. The ephemeral shape of the woman's ghost soared overhead, leading or urging me on, I couldn't tell. Finally, I reached the truck, near tears with relief. The shapes hovered at the perimeter, moaning. I leapt into the cab, locked the door. The ignition, some miracle, roared to life on the first try. I jammed the gear, spinning the wheel. The truck lurched, the lights revealing dozens of spectral figures swirling in the dust beyond the headlights. The radio crackled. "Stay, you can't escape." I pressed the accelerator, tires spinning in the sand. The rig found traction, surging forward. The road behind me seemed to warp, but I forced the rig down the path, ignoring the illusions outside. The shapes tried to block me, arms flailing in the headlights, but the truck plowed through. For an instant, I felt a wave of icy cold as I hit them, but they vanished, replaced by swirling sand. I roared onto the main highway, the illusions fading. My GPS flickered back to normal, displaying the route to Yuma. The radio died to quiet static. All that was left was a trembling in my bones, a sense that I narrowly escaped a trap set by something hungry in the desert. I drove until dawn, not daring to stop. My trailer rattled as if the desert wind still hammered it. I arrived at Yuma exhausted, half-crazed. No one believed my story about ghost signals or a dead road. The company just scolded me for the late delivery. But I know what I heard. Months later, I still dream of that woman's pleas on the radio, the scuttling shapes in the desert night, the sense that the Mojave, or some cursed part of it near the Arizona border, can open a gateway to where lost souls dwell. They broadcast illusions, voices of the doomed, luring good Samaritans or unsuspecting travelers. If you find yourself on a lonely highway in Arizona and your radio crackles with a tearful voice begging for help, be cautious. Because the signal might not be from any living person at all, it might be a trap from the darkness that craves new victims on a ghost road not marked on any map. And if you follow it, you might join those who vanish among the dunes, leaving only a static-laced echo of your final call. Story number 5. The tunnel that never ends. I never meant to drive that route in the first place. My usual path through West Virginia was blocked by a landslide, forcing me onto an old mountain highway I'd never seen on the map. The local radio news said it had been out of use for years, but my GPS insisted it was still viable. Dusk settled over the rolling hills, turning them into dark silhouettes against the violet sky. Desperate to make my delivery schedule, I followed the winding road, headlights cutting through the encroaching twilight. That's how I stumbled upon a tunnel entrance that no map should have indicated was there, and that's how I ended up trapped in a darkness that felt older than the mountains themselves. It started innocently enough. I saw the silhouette of an old stone archway cutting across the road, half covered by vines and undergrowth. A battered sign near the entrance read Madison Pass Tunnel, use at own risk. That phrase sank a shiver into my bones, but the alternative was a treacherous detour over hours of mountainous roads. I told myself it was just a relic of older times, maybe a leftover from the CCC era, or an abandoned railroad converted to a road. So I slowed my truck, shining the high beams into the yawning mouth of the tunnel. The interior was a black void, no lighting. My chest fluttered with unease. But the GPS insisted it was a throughway. I whispered a little prayer and inched inside, the pavement echoing under my wheels. The darkness swallowed me immediately. My headlights illuminated rough stone walls, dripping with moisture. The arch looked old, lined with patches of moss. The air felt cold, damp, as if I had driven straight into a cave. I expected to see a sliver of daylight at the far end if it were short, or maybe faint lighting if it were properly built. But I saw only an endless black corridor ahead. The road seemed smooth enough at first, so I pressed on, going maybe 20 miles per hour. I told myself it might be a mile long, 2 miles max, some old mountain tunnel that led out on the other side. Minutes passed, and no exit appeared, no sign of daylight or even an electric light. My phone lost signal immediately. My radio hissed static. The only sound was my engine's hum, tires gripping the damp asphalt, and occasional drips of water echoing overhead. The claustrophobic sense grew as I realized I'd been inside for perhaps 5 minutes, with no glimpse of an exit. Usually, you see a pinprick of daylight if it's short, or some reflective markers. But nothing. Just more blackness. My hands tightened on the wheel, my breath too loud in my own ears. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe it's just a very long, old tunnel. West Virginia is known for labyrinthine mountainous terrain. Another mile or two, I reasoned. Yet each additional minute with no sign of light gnawed at me. The wall slid by, endlessly repeating patterns of whetstone. Something about those stones unsettled me, like they shifted slightly whenever I looked away. My mind chalked it up to flickering shadows. At about the 10-minute mark, a wave of panic fluttered in my gut. This was beyond unusual. I decided to turn around, find that tunnel entrance, and pick another route. I slowed, braked, prepared a multi-point turn in the darkness. The tunnel was wide enough if I was careful. But as I spun the wheel, my headlights revealed something that nearly made me drop into a full meltdown. Behind me, the tunnel extended as far as I could see, no sign of the entrance. The stone walls looked identical to what I had in front. My mind roared impossible. I'd only traveled in one direction. The entrance should be right there, maybe a quarter mile or so back. But the corridor behind me just stretched on, uniform and unending. Sweat beaded on my brow despite the chilly air. Trembling, I completed the turn and drove back the way I had come, half expecting to see the exit. But each minute that passed, the gloom continued, no archway, no sign of the outside world. My rig's headlights speared forward, showing only the black road and damp walls curving overhead. I felt like a rat in a labyrinth with no exit. Time lost meaning. The clock on my dash read 7:45 p.m. Then 8:15. Then 9 o'clock. No matter how far I drove, the tunnel refused to end. I started yelling at the darkness, cursing. My voice echoed pathetically. Eventually, I paused again, trying another turn. The same dreadful realization, whichever direction I faced, the tunnel looked identical, infinite. Horror welled up in my chest. A thought slid into my mind, you're trapped. I felt tears stinging my eyes, a helpless fury. I tried to gather my wits, remind myself of logic. Tunnels have finite length. This must be some bizarre phenomenon, maybe illusions caused by exhaustion. I inched forward, scanning every detail, hoping to see some variation or sign. The tunnel's walls sometimes opened into small recesses or old maintenance ledges. I saw occasional side corridors bricked off. My imagination conjured shapes lurking there. I told myself it was just a stone and shadow. Then came the first flicker of movement. While passing a side alcove, I glimpsed a figure, vague, gray, humanoid, slipping out of sight behind the corner. My heart thundered. Hello? I called, pulling the rig to a stop, headlights spilling across damp stone. No answer. The shape had vanished. I hopped out, flashlight in hand, ignoring the primal voice screaming at me to stay inside. My footsteps echoed in the hush. The alcove ended in a collapsed door. No one stood there. But the floor was wet, footprints trailing away. I scurried back to the truck, mind reeling. Further along, the tunnel air grew colder. My breath formed faint clouds. A rattling came from behind me, like footsteps scuffing on asphalt. I peered in the side mirror, hard in my throat. Nothing but darkness. Then, from the corner of my eye, a flicker of a shape crossing the tunnel behind my trailer. I yelled, flicking on my rear floodlights. They revealed only swirling dust or mist. But I could feel eyes on me. Time dragged on. The dash clock read 10 p.m., then 11, then midnight. No exit, no sign of the outside world. My fuel gauge inched downward, though I'd started fairly full. Dread ballooned. If I ran dry here, how would I survive? Then, in the reflection of my side mirror, I saw movement again, fleeting forms with sunken eyes, pressed to the trailer, as though sniffing or searching. When I whipped around, they were gone. In an insane attempt, I hammered the accelerator, pushing 50 miles per hour down the endless corridor. The rig roared, headlights scanning a perpetual curve of walls. Minutes of speeding, the engine straining, sweat pouring down my face. I slammed the brake eventually, realized I wasn't any closer to anything. The same gloom. The clock read 1 a.m. My entire body trembled with exhaustion and raw fear. That's when the radio crackled, a faint static, then a voice, you can't outrun it. The tunnel goes on, and they wait. My heart clenched. I hadn't touched the radio, no station was in range. Another hiss, they died here, trapped in a cave-in. Now they roam in the dark. One by one, they claim the living who enter. My throat tightened. A ghostly broadcast? I grabbed the CB mic, demanded, "Who's speaking? Where are you?" Static. Another faint reply, "Leave while you can. They won't let you go." Then the connection died. My mind reeled. Cave-in? Could this be a disused mine shaft or an old railroad that collapsed? Possibly the spirits of workers trapped decades ago, seeking new victims? My pulse pounded with each horrifying thought. Fighting panic, I aimed to find any side passage that might lead to the surface. The overhead beams were slick with condensation, water dripping onto the hood. The place smelled of damp stone and decay. That's when I spotted a rusted metal gate on the right. I braked. Behind it, a corridor sloped upward. Could that be a ventilation shaft leading out? I hopped down, approached the gate. It was locked with a massive chain. Through the bars, the corridor vanished in blackness. Suddenly, from behind me, footsteps. I turned, shining my flashlight. A figure stood near my truck's driver door, a spectral man in old work clothes, face contorted by dirt and dried blood, eyes clouded with misery. My bones froze. He lifted a bony finger, pointing at me, mouth opening in a silent cry. Then, as if the darkness folded around him, he disappeared. A wave of icy terror shook me. I sprinted back into the cab, locked the doors. The overhead dome flickered, revealing footprints made of wet grime on my floor mat. I had no time to dwell on it. I started the engine again, pressing forward or backward, who knew direction anymore? The clock read 2 a.m. The fuel gauge dipped below half. I was living a nightmare. Then the moaning began, like a chorus of voices echoing in the stone. The far edges of the headlights revealed pale shapes creeping along the walls. They wore rags, or old overalls, their faces twisted in silent agony. As I passed, they reached out, leaving smeared handprints on the trailer. My heart hammered like mad. They didn't physically attack, just followed. Or guided me deeper. Time lost meaning, but eventually, a faint glow appeared ahead. I nearly sobbed with relief. Could it be the exit? I pressed the gas. The rig rumbled closer. The glow brightened, revealing an arch of sorts, a metal sign overhead, except it read in battered letters, "No exit." My chest dropped. The glow was from torches mounted along the walls, impossibly old-fashioned. The corridor angled downward. Down? The lighting flickered red, casting dancing shadows. The illusions or ghosts around me moaned, some scuttling to my windows, peering inside. I screamed at them, foot pressed to the pedal. The rig advanced, the engine sounding hollow. Suddenly, with a jolt, the road ended at a chasm. I braked violently, the trailer swaying. The headlights showed a gaping pit, swirling blackness below. On the other side, an arch that maybe led to an actual exit? A bridge spanned the gap, narrow, rotted planks. Too narrow for my truck. The moaning crescendoed behind me, the spectral figures closing in. I was trapped. Desperate, I prepared to reverse. But a monstrous shape emerged from the pit, a colossal ghost of a railroad foreman or something, its face eaten by centuries of darkness, eyes burning with sorrowful fury. It reached up, arms unbelievably long, trying to grasp the front of my truck. I howled, shifting to reverse. The rig roared backward, narrowly avoiding that giant hand. The specters behind parted, letting me pass, as though hurting me. I sped in reverse, not even sure how I navigated, but the corridor twisted again, returning me to the original portion of the tunnel. Or so it seemed. The gloom parted. Suddenly, I saw a half-collapsed archway that looked like daylight behind it. My heart soared. The pale shapes screamed in unison, an echoing lament. The rig lurched forward, tires skidding. I pressed onward, ignoring the wails. The stone overhead crumbled, chunks raining down. Light spilled into the gloom. I glimpsed actual sunshine for the first time in hours. The last specter lunged from the side, face contorted, attempting to block the exit. I clenched the wheel, ramming through the debris. A jarring crash echoed, the rig's windshield splintered in a spiderweb pattern. But I kept going. In an explosion of dust and rubble, we burst into open air, dawn sunlight flooding the cracked windshield. I slammed the brakes on a gravel turnout. Coughing dust, heart pounding, I realized I'd emerged on some old road cut into a hillside. Behind me lay a collapsed tunnel entrance, half buried in rubble, no sign of the corridor we traversed. The sunshine felt surreal on my skin. I nearly wept. My dash clock read 6:33 a.m. I'd lost hours in that nightmare. No official records show a Madison Pass tunnel in that region, just rumors of an abandoned mine or a half-built route sealed decades ago after a tragic collapse. Locals mention ghost stories of workers buried alive, wandering in the dark. I reported my incident to the company, claiming a partial cave-in forced a massive detour. No one believed the rest. They just saw the damage to my truck, the battered trailer, the meltdown in my eyes. They assigned me a different route, suggested therapy. But I know what I experienced in that infinite tunnel, how I saw the legion of lost souls trapped in eternal bloom, trying to lure me deeper. Now, whenever I pass West Virginia highways, I watch the mountain ridges warily, scanning for hidden tunnel openings. Because I suspect that if I ever stumble onto that ghostly passage again, I might not escape a second time. The specters in the dark hunger for living company, replaying their final moments of doom. And once you're inside, each turn leads you further from the real world, deeper into a labyrinth of stone and sorrow. If you see an old sign for a tunnel that no map shows, remember my story. Keep driving, find another route. Otherwise, you may end up like me, racing through a corridor that never ends, haunted by the echoes of those who died there, and longing for a dawn that might never come.